Thank you all for making time today and attending our webinar. Today we have two special guests joining us to discuss ZTNA in the cybersecurity space. Tim Liu is co-founder and CTO at Hillstone Networks. And joining Tim, today we have David Holmes, who's a senior analyst at Forrester, covering security topics across strategy, architecture, and zero trust. After their presentation, David and Tim will answer any incoming questions live. And now, without further ado, I will pass it on to David, who will kick off the session.
Hey, everybody, it's David at Forrester. If you don't know Forrester, we are the research firm that works with business and technology leaders to develop customer-obsessed strategies that drive growth. We're also known as the people who coined the term zero trust. And I'm David Holmes, an analyst on the security and risk team. I cover zero trust, I cover network security, and other things like DNS security and cryptography. And I spend all of my time working on these things, but when I'm not doing that, I'm fly fishing or traveling. Here's some of my published and planned research. Recently published Forrester's response to the SASE model. We call that a zero trust edge. But I also published waves on zero trust network access and microsegmentation and firewalls, and just recently released an intermediate roadmap to zero trust and others. And of course, there's always new research coming. But today, I'm happy to be here and to be a guest speaker talking about my viewpoints on zero trust network access. And I'll talk about what it is, kind of how you see it in the market, how it works. And then I will end with some research that I had fielded to about 45 actual customers who are using zero trust network access. And I think those are some pretty interesting results of the questions that I asked them. So let me just start with a definition. So what is this thing? What is zero trust network access? It is a technology that uses zero trust principles largely to provide access from remote workers to an on-prem application. Now, it doesn't have to be remote workers, but it doesn't have to be an on-prem application. It could be in the cloud. This is just the case that this is most often used in, and definitely the use case that was used during the pandemic, when that is what everyone needed and when everyone was remote. So this technology should replace VPN technology, especially for remote workers. And it should authorize access to specific applications rather than just sort of letting somebody into a network. And so let's talk about that, right? So if you, on the left here in these two diagrams, you'll see the way a VPN works. It's very much, you connect to it, you authenticate to it, and then it sort of lets you into the network and you can go anywhere. Now, there are some VPN solutions that are a little bit more granular, but most organizations that field the VPN, it's very, very sort of wide open. And if you take this example, that the user one should actually only have access to application one. In a VPN situation, very often user one has access to the application number two. Also, at least to try to make a network connection to it. That can be a problem because if user one is actually a hacker and has got the credentials of user one, then they could get into the VPN and then start attacking application two until they eventually can get into it, right? So VPNs just typically do not have the granular access that people have wanted, and honestly have been a very sort of anti-zero trust pattern. And so you'll see some Forrester analysts who walk around, talking about, hey, it's time to kill the VPN. This is very much the technology that replaces it. So on the right, you will see the concept of the software-defined perimeter, which is work that came out of the Cloud Security Alliance and talks about how could you do this differently. And in that case, a software-defined perimeter might be completely closed and not even listening unless you send it a special packet called a single packet authentication that effectively unlocks the software-defined perimeter and then allows you to come in, right? It does the authentication and the authorization, but it also enforces things like, okay, user one should only be able to go to application one, and they can't even launch an attack against application 2, or user 2 just has access to application 2 and not application 1. And ideally, a hacker would never be able to even get in, because if they can't send the single packet authentication, they can't even establish a connection, which is a very, very zero trusty concept. Now, these the different flavors of ZTNA out there, I think there's two. One is that this exists at the perimeter and all of the work is done there, right? So if you have applications in a data center, you could host your own ZTNA software, and it basically does all the work right there at the perimeter. This is sort of the minor, this is the, in the marketplace, maybe 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 customers would prefer this option. And they tend to be high security environments. Think like a country's Department of Defense or a branch of the military, or somebody who has requirements that, hey, none of our authentications can happen in the cloud. So we need to do all this ourselves. Now, the drawbacks to this are you have to host the software yourself, right? Make sure that it's load balancing properly and have monitoring and checks on it, upgrade the software, all the stuff that people actually don't want to do. And that is why I'd say almost every solution out there also includes an option to make this as a service. And where a lot of the mechanics and the software is actually hosted in the cloud, and the authentication might happen in the cloud. And this diagram shows sort of what that looks like. The remote user authenticates up into the cloud. The application inside the perimeter has a connector, which is just a piece of software, and it can connect out to the cloud and establish a tunnel. Now, because it's connecting outward, it doesn't need a hole in the firewall. And in fact, in some situations, you could actually completely close your firewall and say, no incoming connections are allowed, and this still works, which is another very, very zero trusty concept. But the real sort of benefit or the draw of this model is that you don't have to host most of the software, right? You just run the connector. All of the brains of everything is just hosted by a vendor or somebody like that, and they are responsible for upkeep and scaling and the maintenance and all that. Now, when we as a research firm, we survey thousands of security decision makers every year, and we ask them how they would prefer to consume security capability X. It doesn't matter what X is. 75% say, I want that as a service. So this is the one that most organizations who are buyers are looking to go and get. But like I said, those other organizations that want to host it themselves in their previous model, they tend to be really, really large, like hundreds of thousands of users. So it's so that's kind of the state of the buying pattern there. Almost every vendor out there will offer this as a service. Some offer the self-hosted option as well. So here's another look at it, and a look at where this starts to get a little bit complicated. So back when we all used VPNs, and so this is a conventional access architecture. This is honestly how most organizations still do access. Your remote worker connects in through the VPN, but you might also have partners, like business partners, who do need access to applications that you are running inside your perimeter, right? And this could be contractors or payroll or maybe somebody runs your whole finance department. But anyway, they're a separate organization. They're a true third party, but they still need access to get into your environment. This is what that looked like here, right? Everybody came in through VPN connector. With ZTNA, for the third parties, the good services will also integrate with the Active Directories or the identity providers of the third parties, and then have policy that lets them in, right? So it understands this is a third party. Okay, so these following policies apply. So for example, anybody coming in with these credentials can only access application 1. For example, the partner 1 can only access application 1. Partner 2, anybody coming from there can only access application 2. And the remote worker, he also goes through the Zero Trust Network Access Gateway, and maybe they're just doing remote desktop. So This is much, much more granular and much more identity-based. I put out a report on Zero Trust Network Access oh my gosh, it's been 2 years ago now, or a year and a half ago. And I looked at 10 different criteria, and in the report, I talk about, I think, what are the three ones you need to look at when you look at a solution. In the red box here, I talked a little bit about the deployment flexibility already in this webinar about self-hosted versus software as a service. And I just talked about ecosystem integration. How well does the solution support third-party IDPs, for example? But a third criteria that I think is very important when you're looking at these solutions is how well does the vendor solution support not just web applications, but non-web applications. All solutions support web applications, but there are many things that are not. For example, voice over IP, like a phone system, uses different protocols that are very, very different from HTTP, and sometimes can be a challenge. Remote desktop or VDI are other common ones for developers. It's SSH. And it starts to get very complicated once you mix these environments. So for example, if you have third parties who need non-web application access to your on-prem apps, that's a challenge. And it's a challenge. There's no single way that this is done. Different vendors do it in different ways. And one of the pieces of advice I give people is make sure that the way that they do that is the way that you're comfortable with. So as I mentioned, every solution out there does web applications. So if you're looking at a solution that doesn't do web applications, it better be for a good reason, right? We only develop on mainframes or something, and these are all mainframe apps. It would be very, very specialized, and you would be very much in a different world. It doesn't mean you don't need to do ZTNA. You still should from a security perspective. It's just that you might be looking at something very niche. RDP, there's still a lot of remote desktop out there, and many organizations and clients that I talk to I tell them, go find out your exposure to remote desktop and how much you need that. Make sure that the vendor provides that in a way that you're comfortable with. I mentioned VoIP and SIP as being challenges. For OT, which is operational technology, industrial control systems, manufacturing plants, there are some specialized solutions out there, and there are some vendors who will provide ZTNA, and they happen to have a heritage in ICS and OT, and they do pretty well at it. But I still think a bulk of that kind of work is still yet to be done. Does that make sense? So that, I think, how ZTNA relates to the industrial control systems, that is still evolving. So we'll watch that space. And then sometimes I'll talk with an organization that does a lot of software development, or a game company or something, and they have their own set of requirements, and they're very often around the common tools that you see developers use, like Subversion or Git or Perforce, etc. All right, so I had promised I would end with some insights from actual Zero Trust Network Access customers. So I surveyed about 45 actual customers, 43 responded. And the first thing I asked them is what were the most important capabilities that drove you to adopt the ZTNA solution that you adopted? Now, they could choose more than one response here, which is why these numbers add up to more than 43. But if you look at the top one, it says the main driver was support the remote workforce with higher security. So you would think that, oh, this is a security thing. Actually, that might not be true. If you look at the second and third responses from the top, one is support remote workforce with better performance, and the second one is I want to move away from backhauling VPN for remote access. Very often, that is a performance conversation. So if you combine these two, even understanding there might be some overlap, it comes out that Zero Trust Network Access has been both about security and about performance, right? I would say, especially during the pandemic when everyone was forced to be home and could not go to the office or to the site that actually had the application, that it was perhaps more about performance then, but it's still a very critical part of the conversation. I asked these respondents, did your current ZTNA solution replace a previously existing VPN or remote access solution at your organization? Just about 2/3, 64% said yes, it replaced a VPN. 32% said no. When we asked people, if you replaced a previous existing solution, why? And you could choose more than one response here. So this is a smaller subset, right? So of the 2/3 of the people who said yes, it did, 14 of them said the previous solution was a VPN and I was looking for more secure access, right? They had recognized the problems of VPN and they were looking for more zero trust. The next one down was the previous solution was a VPN and suffered performance problems. And then the third one was we were actually looking for moving to as a service, right? They want to, I've mentioned this before, 75% of everybody would just prefer to consume everything as a service and actually not manage that software themselves. I asked people, okay, so you have deployed this zero trust network access. How many on-prem applications are supported by your ZTNA solution? And I was pleasantly surprised to see so many. So the range that had the most respondents was 50 to 100. I would have thought it would have been more about 25. So I'm encouraged to see people, once they get zero trust network access deployed, are actually fronting a large number of applications on-prem. I think that's fantastic. Then you had one respondent who's doing more than 300. That's amazing. Now, I mentioned early on in this webinar that there's no reason you can't put this in the cloud. It's just not the primary case. And I don't know that I've ever talked to somebody who is doing that. But there's no reason you couldn't do it. Here, I asked people, how many cloud applications is your ZTNA solution connected to? So the numbers here are smaller, as one would expect, smaller than the on-prem, but sort of higher than I would have expected, right? So the most common here is somewhere between 21 and 50. Now, there are other benefits besides, replacing an on-prem VPN. Zero trust network access solutions, even if they're fronting applications that are hosted on the cloud, are doing some of the extra work like authentication and authorization, authorizing third parties. And then some of them can even do things like continuous verification and adaptive authentication as well. So ZTNA definitely the way of the future for authenticating to applications. And then the last question that I asked people was, over the next 3 to 5 years, do you believe that standalone zero trust network access solutions will become more or less important for organizations? Check this out, 86%, so almost 9 out of 10 said they think it will become more important. Only about 7% said less important, and 7% said about the same. So I think the nuance in this one was about standalone. And I'm not sure that the respondents took that into consideration. I think that when they read this question, they just thought, is ZTNA going to be more important or less important? That's it. All right, so that's all the prepared materials that I brought. I'm going to turn it over to Tim now. And then, of course, I'll stick around for the question and answer section.
Okay. So David gave us a great view of, how from analyst point of view, ZTNA market is evolving. This part, I'm going to talk about the Hillstone perspective, how we see the technology as a ZTNA as a technology trends. So I wouldn't go into a lot of detail about how the security technology is evolving, but essentially the major driving forces are the rapid change of IT and the network that supports it. We are seeing evolving threat landscapes, new threats that targeting new technologies, new threats that actually targeting old technologies, just new business models that for making money for the dark side of the web. We also see more compliance requirements and also requirement to protect user data and user privacy. So all of these bring about change. And the part of the change that's relevant to the ZTNA is actually changing of the perimeter. The traditional perimeter is actually physical, right? It has an inside, that's outside, with the inside as trusted, outside as untrusted. You connect with, if you're on the outside, you connect first. You authenticate and go through a VPN, then you are treated as a trusted part of trusted network. A lot of the major technology development today actually disrupt this physical parameter. We have cloud technology that have virtual boundaries. We have BYOD, which actually introduce untrusted devices inside a trusted network. So in the traditional parameter, we usually use firewalls to segregate network by locality. Certain departments may sit together and they have their own network segments and access their own certain departmental servers. So nowadays we have hybrid model, right? On one side, the server moved. Some are still on site, some are co-located to the cloud, and also on the client side, employee may be sitting in an office. They could be on a remote branch or work from home. We also have lots of different kind of new users, new endpoints. We can have partner networks, we can have OT and IoT networks that are distributed and each with very different kind of authentication and authorization requirements. This traditional black and white approach, trust on trust or nothing, does not work, right? Also, the other problem is it is a static approach. It does not consider the cases where the state of the devices or endpoints could change. It could get infected. The patch level for the computer may no longer be acceptable, etc. So here is an overview of the Hillstone's ZTNA solution. It is identity-based and context-sensitive, provides a context-sensitive logical boundary between enterprise users and their applications. There are three major components. There's a ZTNA endpoints, the ZTNA controller, and the ZTNA gateway. The ZTNA controller lives on a Hillstone HSM, centralized management server. It manages the ZTNA policy across the gateways. The ZTNA gateway is a physical and virtual NG firewall. It has all the advanced security features available from the NG firewall. ZTNA endpoints are agents or software that runs on top of user devices that request access. So in the ZTNA process, the ZTNA gateway gets the access request from the endpoints. It verifies user identity information with the enterprise IAM. It could be a server or ID as a service. Optionally, it can check the status of the device for its health, for its patch level, etc. And then it matches with the ZTNA policy to see if the access should be granted or not. The major highlights of the Hillstone's ZTNA solution are as follows. First of all, it's identity-based, least privilege, secure access. The user can only access the authorized applications or services based on the ZTNA policy configured. Second one is a context-aware, adaptive access control. We actually continuously monitor and evaluate the endpoint status. So if there's any change, such as compromised endpoints according to your endpoint AV or your OS patch level is changes, so we can actively change the access. That this endpoint is permitted. We can revoke the access if it's no longer allowed. The third highlight is centralized and efficient management. The HSM integrates device management, not only provides ZTNA related management, also give you ability to manage your security aspects of your infrastructure. It also provides comprehensive security monitoring. So basically give you a single pane of glass view of not only the ZTNA functions, but also security functions. Last but not least, all the system is built around Hillstone's NG firewall, which will give you natively all the advanced security features, not only antivirus, IPS, also advanced threat detection, etc. Following few slides, look at these highlights in a little bit more detail. The first is about identity-aware least privilege secure access. Actually, David covered this part already. So for the traditional VPN, once you connect it to networks through the VPN gateway, the endpoint is already trusted. So the client have network level access to all applications and services. If you have a malicious or compromised client, it may create havoc across all of these applications and servers. In a ZTNA solution, each endpoint, when it's connected to the ZTNA gateway, have an identity. So access can be granted based on that user identity. And it can be as narrow or as broad as you like. And it can only access the selected applications, the service that's allowed. We also support, in this scenario, also support SPA. I think David also mentioned that single packet authentication is a way for the endpoint to only access to ZTNA gateway unless that single packet is authenticated, avoids DDoS attacks on the ZTNA gateway. So the next is context aware. Here, context information meaning the status of the endpoints. In traditional VPN, if the VPN connection is established and the endpoint is compromised, it's basically like a malicious actor inside your network. Attacker can, perform lateral attacks on your servers and applications. For the ZTNA solution, the endpoint status is continuously monitored. The AV status could be checked, its process status, its patch level. All this can be summarized and reported. So if there's a change in the endpoint status, access to the authorized application may be revoked and further access can be denied. So as I said before, the Hillstone solution is based on enterprise-grade level security that our NG firewall provides. The Hillstone solution not only gives you user and context-based access, ZTNA access, it also gives you user and context-based security. First of all, is form factor. We have physical devices ranging from performance of gigabits to terabits, and we also have virtual firewalls. So this solution can basically span your whole enterprise infrastructure, from your headquarters to your branch office, from your physical data center to your public cloud. So all of this can be covered by this solution. It basically gives you different options for different kind of scenarios. The solution comes with a rich set of security functions from traditional antivirus IPS to advanced threat protection, botnet detection, sandbox, etc., to all the advanced security features. All of these can be user-based and also context-based. The solution is scalable, give you high-density ports, it gives you physical expansion, storage options for analytics, etc. And on chassis-based systems also provides upgradable performance options. It also offers smart and automated operation. It has features that help you manage and respond to security response. The solution has centralized management. The ZTNA management and orchestration is a module inside HSM, the Hillstone Security Manager. HSM, you have centralized management for ZTNA, also for the security functions. for the all the gateway devices. With this, you can manage all of your gateways, both for configuration, but also give you comprehensive monitoring. This HSM also offers batch management, and it's especially suitable for very large deployment. Hillstone ZTNA solution offers high availability features. It allows configuration of up to 24 backup gateways. During initial connection, the ZTNA endpoints will pull down all the list of all gateways, and the links to these gateways are all monitored. If you have a failover happen during the connection, for example, that the ZTNA gateway is overloaded, or you have maximum sessions on the gateway is exceeded, then it can fail over. The client will automatically connect to the optimal backup gateway. So there's several scenarios where this can happen. After the connection is established, also a failover can happen if the primary gateway fails. The ZTNA endpoints will seamlessly fail over to the optimal backup gateway, and without any re-authentication needed in this case. The context aware of ZTNA gateway of the ZTNA solution come from the endpoints. The ZTNA clients on the endpoints collects information on OSs, on patch level, AV or DLP status, process status, etc. Also, the time and location can also be taken into account. For example, access can be granted only for in a certain time period or at a certain location. Hillstone ZTNA client support major desktop and mobile OSs like Microsoft Windows, Mac OS, Linux, iOS, and Android. We also offer a very smooth transitioning into the ZTNA solution. That's actually one of the major advantages of our solution. The Hillstone NG firewall can be upgraded to a ZTNA gateway through a firmware upgrade. We can also upgrade the Hillstone Secure Connect client to support the ZTNA through a software upgrade. And there's also compatibility consideration between all the versions of Secure Connect clients and the NG firewall or the ZTNA gateway. This upgradable product basically protects user investments and offers a very smooth transitioning to either prototype or rollout of your ZTNA solution. Here are some of the major use cases of ZTNA solution. First is the remote office and mobile workers. This is probably the most common. In this case, define access policies based on user, your endpoint status, your location, to give least privileges and reduce risks. For example, only authorized devices are allowed to access with these privileges. You can require OS has to be up to date. The antivirus is running. Once endpoint is compromised, you can revoke or deny the access, etc. The other scenarios is for a partner access. You can configure, certain applications and services for partners without exposing other applications. This makes it easy to collaborate with partners without, compromising your security. Other cases are like government agencies that has a lot of compliance requirements. The solution offers least privilege access that helps these organizations, meet their security requirements. Also for service providers and MSSP, they can offer ZTNA security service to their customers. Through, we have Hillstone devices have VSIS capability, and through this VSIS, the MSSP or service provider can offer multi-tenancy for ZTNA functions. By combining ZTNA and security together, this solution is very cost-effective to offer. A couple of customer cases we have deployed. The first one is a financial institution. It's a pretty typical ZTNA solution. The institution has a requirement. It has an internal application and that needs to provide least privilege access to different kind of departments. This is a pretty typical ZTNA. So we basically deployed ZTNA solution with 400 users, 400 licenses at the perimeter, and working as a ZTNA gateway, the zero trust access help them achieve their security needs. The second one is for a telecom customer, and it has many employees working at the various locations, and all of them require remote access. The company have compliance requirements, that they have to, only allow access for certain operating systems on the endpoints. So this can be handled also by the ZTNA clients through its context check. So we deploy this data center firewall with 250 ZTNA license at the perimeter, and enables the zero trust access for their employees. And that's pretty much it. And in conclusion, the Hillstone ZTNA solution, I think the key differentiations are first of all is we are a security vendor. So we also offer application layer security features in addition to the ZTNA access. I think this combination will help our customer to actually offers not only user level access, but also user level security. From feature-wise, we also offer SPA that further secure the ZTNA access. Also, we offer very smooth transitioning from our solution with both the device level and also the software through the software and firmware upgrade to help the customer preserve their investment. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Tim and David. This has been super insightful, and we have some solid questions from our viewers, so let's get to it. The first question here is, if an organization purchases a ZTNA solution, does it mean that it has achieved zero trust?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So if an organization has ZTNA, does it mean that they have achieved zero trust? In the grand scheme of things, they have progressed on a journey towards zero trust, right? So if zero trust is the information security model that minimizes implicit trust in an organization, they have taken what I call like a first real step into zero trust by deploying zero trust network access. In the roadmap document that I mentioned earlier, implementing zero trust is like phase 3. But the previous phases are ones that simply set up your organization so that you can use ZTNA effectively. And those previous steps are things like go out and figure out which applications you need to give access to for all your remote workers. And then another step might be classify your data. And those kind of, that data classification is something that you can do ongoing through the journey, but it can help you figure out what applications you're going to need to give access to, or that you should put ZTNA in front of. So the way I look at it, it's not like you should, if you just deploy ZTNA, you shouldn't just run around telling people I'm zero trust now. But what you can say is I've taken a very credible step towards zero trust.
Thank you, Tim. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think the solution is an essential part, but I think it to better use it, you actually have additional things that's needed. One of the things is the granularity consideration, because if you want to very fine-grained control your zero trust, there may be a lot of changes to your policy on a regular basis. This is operation cost that you have to consider, because I think most of the applications today actually have, user access control. And how do you want to combine that with your zero trust? You have to basically balance the operation cost with the security.
So the next question we have is, what's the first step towards getting started with ZTNA?
Great question. So you need to figure out which applications you're going to give access to specifically your remote users. Now, this might sound like a no-brainer, but people forget this step, and I'll give you an example. I took a call from a client who said, hey, I've already chosen a zero trust network access solution. But how can you tell us how does it perform with voice over IP, which is a non-web application? And I said, oh, the vendor you chose, their solution doesn't support that. And they said, oh, this is a problem because we're a call center. Our whole business is voice over IP. I said, well, I wish you would have called me first because I would have just told you this. But if they had done the homework that I had just mentioned, figure out what applications you actually need to provide access and make sure that the vendor that you choose supports that. So that's the first step I tell everybody.
Tim, your thoughts on that question?
I would suggest the customer to talk to different ZTNA vendors to find out their solution, to do some, proof of concept, do some pilot projects to see whether the solution meets their needs. Because there may be applications that a certain vendor will support while the other, some other vendor may not support. There are feature differences, there are capability differences, ease of use. All of this may play a role. And also, I think for the users of IT department, they will raise issues if one of your solutions make the application not usable.
Another question here is, how does ZTNA fit into the SASE framework?
Good question. So the SASE framework, just to try to sum it up quickly, we have a slightly different name for this at Forrester. We call it a zero trust edge, but it's effectively the same model, the same architecture that we're describing. I think it's the convergence of networking and security services to be consumed as a service, delivered primarily by one vendor from the cloud or from a cloud toward the cloud, right? The way that ZTNA fits into that is replace the VPN. Once you replace the VPN with ZTNA, one of the things that happens is your remote workers are now only sending traffic into your perimeter to access the applications that exist there. Everything else is going straight out to the internet. Now that's dangerous because there's no filtering happening for your remote worker. They're effectively unprotected. When you had the VPN, they were going through your next-gen firewall all the way onto the internet, and the next-gen firewall could do quite a bit of work to protect that user. That no longer really happens when you have ZTNA. So you need something else in order to protect them, and that something else is the other components of the SASE framework, like cloud-delivered secure web gateway, cloud-delivered CASB, maybe cloud-delivered DLP or firewall as a service. The other complementary services that existed on-prem that are no longer protecting the remote worker.
We see SASE as a bigger framework. As a SASE is a security framework. If you look at the framework itself, there's a part that all the different kind of endpoints are connected, and there's another part where all the security service are delivered, usually through the cloud. So I think the ZTNA plays a part in the first part that I just mentioned, how the endpoints are connected. So the ZTNA will covers how the endpoints are authenticated, how they are allowed in, how the policies are provisioned, etc. So I think the ZTNA will be a part of the SASE framework.
So next question would be, I think you touched on this, David, earlier, but the question is, will ZTNA fully replace VPN in the future across all deployments?
I always get this question. So I actually didn't touch on it, except to say I had asked people that question. Did it replace your VPN? And something like 2/3 said yes. But in answering this question, when somebody says, is it going to replace VPNs? in my career, which is now, I don't know, 30 years old, I've seen many technologies come that purport to replace another technology. What really happens is those two technologies just live side by side, like for the rest of your career. Like, you could think of many, many examples of this. In cloud, for example, cloud hosts about when we survey our security leaders, we ask them, how many of your apps have moved to the cloud? And last year, the response was about 45%, which meant that 55% of apps still live on-prem. So, but getting back to the answer to this question, I think these two things will coexist for some time. The ideal state is for the bulk of your remote workers to be using ZTNA. So, for example, somebody from marketing or somebody from sales would be using zero trust network access to access your applications and not using a VPN. You'll probably have network administrators and other people who need really broad access to things like switches. They'll probably always be using a VPN. And then I think site-to-site VPN is almost certainly always going to exist. So, so there's your answer. Like, try to get the bulk of your remote workers to replace VPN with ZTNA.
And I think this question is for Tim directly. Why Hillstone ZTNA? So what are the key differentiators of the Hillstone ZTNA solution?
I covered this a little bit during my presentation. I think there are several differentiators. One of the major ones is we are a security vendor. So our ZTNA solution is tightly integrated with our security offering. If you think about ZTNA offers user and context sensitive, access control, but all the security, identity need to carry over to security as well, right? Because for example, with partner networks, you may want a special kind of security for that kind of access. So with an integrated approach, we can also offer, user level security and context sensitive security for your solution, and I think that's very important. And the other major advantages is our solution can be smoothly transitioned from existing NG firewall solution. So our ZTNA gateway is a firmware upgradable from our gateway, and all the endpoint software also can be software upgraded from the Secure Connect clients. All of this upgradability actually help the customer preserve their existing investment and also give you a smooth transitioning into ZTNA.
And that's all the time we have today. On behalf of the Forrester and Hillstone Networks teams, I want to thank you all for your time today. See you next time.